Hello and welcome. If you're happy sitting in the front, that would make our life more easy. It's usually nice to feel that you're talking to people rather than shouting across the hall to the back row. I know at least Finnish people love to sit in the back or even hide in the cupboards. Welcome to this session, which is called Co-Production of Social Innovation with Persons with Disabilities. And my name is Reetta Mietola. I'm from University of Helsinki, and I have the honor of being the moderator of this session. And I have here with me Harry Roche. Harry can introduce himself, but he's a self-advocate. And Ailis Hardy from Inclusion International. And they will be talking about a guideline that has been co-produced with persons with disabilities, which was called Listen, Include, Respect. So the way that we are going to work is that I will give the floor to Harry and Ailis. And after their presentation, I will give a short commentary on what they have been presenting, and then we will open the floor for discussion. And all of this in 1 hour, very packed. So please, Harry and Ailis, floor is yours.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming this morning. So we have some slides that we're going to be showing and a short video. So we will just start off with an introduction again. So my name is Ailis. I work for Inclusion International. I am a program manager and I work mainly on programs and projects around self-advocacy and inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities, inclusive participation.
So my name is Harry Roche. Some of you guys may remember me. I was in Helsinki a few weeks ago at another conference. So I'm from the United Kingdom and I work for a learning intellectual disability organisation called MENCAP as a digital accessibility officer. And I'm here as a self-advocate and going to talk to you about all the stuff I've worked on and Listen, Include, Respect when I worked at Inclusion International.
Great, thanks, Harry. Could we have the slides up, if that's okay? Oh, clicker, sorry. Thank you. So that was our hello. Harry has some accessibility reminders.
Okay, what's going to be important now is to talk about the accessibility reminders. What is important is that in the audience, let's try to speak in a more clear and simple language so everyone can follow. And if you need to use any jargon, if you have to use a jargon word, please explain what the meaning of it. But let's all try to talk accessible as possible. So let's think about speaking clear and simple.
Thanks, Harry. So just a quick introduction about who Inclusion International is. So Inclusion International is the international network of people with intellectual disabilities and their families. We have members in every region of the world. We have around 200 members, and our members are small, medium and very large organisations. But what brings all of our organisations in our network together is that they all work on the rights and inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities. We have many service provider members and many in Europe who work as part of our network and our regional member, Inclusion Europe. So I'll pass to Harry to introduce what is Listen, Include, Respect.
Okay, now what is Listen, Include, Respect? Listen, Include, Respect was set up during the pandemic to set up some of the guidelines so people with intellectual disability can access accessible and reasonable accommodation. So this is for this is for organisations or any other organisations, so it gives them like advice to get accessible information and make reasonable accommodations within their workplace, and how people with intellectual disabilities can be part of the decision making. This was created by not just Inclusion International, also our partners Down Syndrome International. We've set this program as a joint program, so we kind of come together to actually make the changes happen. So the whole point is we want our self-advocates to be involved in the decision making, and they are being included in everything the work every organisation does. So we are kind of, this isn't just a short-term program, this is long-term.
Thanks, Harry. So yeah, like Harry said, they're guidelines for organisations and for all types of organisations, and they're about how they give tools and advice to organisations about how to be more inclusive and make sure that people with intellectual disabilities can take part in decision making, as Harry said, and work activities in any sort of place where work or decisions are made. So that means that the goal of the guidelines is that everyone gets information in a way that they understand, that they can share their ideas and their experiences and knowledge alongside everyone else, that they are part of the processes from the beginning and they can make decisions at every stage and are treated as an equal part of the team. And when we say teams, that might be as staff members, that might be on boards or committees, that might be as people involved with projects, or it might be as users of services. So Harry, why do we need the guidelines?
We need the guidelines because we want organisations to take the responsibility to be accessible and inclusive to everyone. We want organisations, they need tools and support with a little help from Inclusion International and Down Syndrome International, and self-advocates of intellectual disability who we work with, who can actually help these organisations set up accessible tools. Also, including people with intellectual disabilities is a long process of changing the way, but we think changing the phase we do things.
Yeah, that's just to add on to Harry's point. So we know that we as organisations have a responsibility to be more inclusive, and organisations that work on the rights of people with disabilities or are service providers for people with disabilities really should be role modelling the inclusion that we want to see in our communities. And as Harry said, we know that it's a long process, and it's not just about having a committee or making documents accessible. It's about changing the way we do things and about changing the way we work and the way we think. So just to talk quickly about how we created the guidelines. So as Harry said, we started in 2020 and we brought together a reference group of people with intellectual disabilities from our networks, so from Inclusion International's network and Down Syndrome International's network, so people with intellectual disabilities, family members and professionals and they came together to be a reference group who guided and led this work. So we created a survey, and then we did a series of consultations to find out from our members what were the barriers that stopped people from taking part and being included and being part of decision making in organisations. What were the barriers and what were the solutions? What were the good ideas in our networks that meant that people were included and could take part? So you can see we had a couple of years of consultations and test work, and then last year in 2022 we launched the website. So on the whole, we had 350 organisations involved who contributed to making the guidelines from 100 countries. We had more than 1,500 people, and about 800 of those people were people with intellectual disabilities, and they contributed to the process through around 60 inclusive consultations in all regions of the world. And so you can see here's the map of all the countries that took part. So I think Harry has a question.
Yes, so here's a question for the participants. What challenges are you facing in including people with intellectual disabilities in your work and decision makers? There's no right or wrong answer. It's just you have the expression to express yourself.
From the university perspective, is that at the university, people don't even think that people with intellectual disabilities could contribute. That it's not a question, it's kind of like, it's non-existent. So we don't even get to questions of accessibility or the process or anything. We just don't sort of, at the university, in general, we don't even recognize that this group of people could contribute into making university a better, more inclusive place, or contribute to research and knowledge production. So I think that's the first challenge that we face. But others are probably a bit more inclusive anyway. So any comments? Any contributions?
I suppose that sometimes is the unknowledge about disabilities and the abilities that people with disabilities have to make part of is one of the challenges. To change the mindset of the community is one of.
Hello, my name is Kjell. I'm with an NGO in Sweden that organizes non-formal adult education. And we're the biggest one then when it comes to enrolling people with disability. 80% of all of those activities within these NGOs in Sweden are with us. But we are an organization of 900 employees, and before the pandemic, 20,000 study circle leaders. So our problem would be that the work to include are being done by people who think it's important. But we're a big organization, and the rest of them that don't find it important aren't ready to invite or pick up ideas or do anything simply because lack of knowledge. And it's very hard to address that in an efficient way.
Will we take one more and then? Sorry. Thank you.
Hi, my name is May, and I am a speech and language therapist working on an assistive technology team in Agencia Support. I think one of the challenges we face is that sometimes we are working with people who don't speak, or when they speak, maybe they can't put their thoughts into words that easily, and they don't always have the tools that they need to be able to express themselves, and then that's going to affect their ability to be involved in the decision-making process. And I also like to link that to earlier this morning, where we were talking about individuals who have severe or profound intellectual disabilities, who may not be able or to demonstrate to us how, what their decisions are. So that's just one of the challenges, I think.
Great. Thank you. So we asked that question just because those are many of the barriers that we heard from our networks as well, and people with intellectual disabilities. So a lack of awareness around inclusion, or a lack of understanding of inclusion, and the real belief that it is possible, and it takes work and support and time, but everyone can be included. The other barriers, which were mentioned around inaccessible information and communication. So self-advocates told us that was a major barrier to being included and taking part in work. Not providing individual accommodation. So, for example, support workers, or extra time, or assistive devices. Poor support was something that came up a lot in our consultations. So people not having consistent support that really understood how to make sure that people were taking part, could take part, and giving them the support they needed to do that. Lack of time was a big barrier that people faced. Excluded from places where decisions were made. So, for example, on boards, in staff teams. At all levels, people with intellectual disabilities were excluded from places where decisions were made. And finally, no budgets or resources that supported inclusion. And I think that was raised earlier at the end of the first panel about the importance of having resources to kind of support this sort of work. So that helped us, understanding those barriers and hearing about the solutions that our members had found helped us to create some principles. There's a lot of them, there's 8 of them, but they really underpin all of the rest of the guidelines and are kind of the basis for what our members told us made an inclusive organisation. So, I mean, I'll read them all out just so that we can all understand. But the first one was believing in inclusion. So that's really understanding that inclusion is possible and that no one is too disabled to take part. Making sure that there's opportunities at every level for self-advocate leadership, and organisations understanding that inclusion isn't possible without self-advocates being leaders and being at the front along with professionals and families. Building awareness and understanding and fighting and pushing back against discrimination and stereotypes inside and outside of organisations. Communicating in an accessible way. So yeah, I think we all know about Easy Read, we all know about the importance and the usefulness of creating accessible information, but it's also around like communicating. So is email an accessible format to communicate with people with intellectual disabilities? Sometimes, but not always. And that can be a big barrier for people. So thinking about how we communicate and making sure that, we think about individuals' requirements. Providing reasonable accommodations kind of is linked with that, so making sure that we think about what each person needs and being able to provide that and really listening and taking the time to find out. And then valuing the process of working together, so that's understanding that by including people right at the start and all through the process, lessons can be learnt by people with intellectual disabilities and people supporting them, staff members, organisations, all throughout the process. And by the end, everyone will have more knowledge, more experience, a deeper understanding of inclusion, and that makes the next time easier. So just kind of really valuing that work together. Using the CRPD as our guide, which is, the guide for how we all need to be inclusive and accessible and make sure that participation is real. And then finally understanding that it's a journey and that it does take time and that no one's perfect, no organisation has got it right. And it might take time, but it's our responsibility to change the way that we do things and start working on it. And we can all start where we are, and we should all celebrate the successes that we have already achieved.
So this is the listen, include, respect guidelines. So we've created a Listen, Include, Respect website back in 2022, and this was created by our self-advocate consultants who actually helped us create this website. And what we did was we wanted to make it as accessible as possible, so we could have a website so everyone can actually find everything they need, rather than going onto the Inclusion International or Down Syndrome International website to get these guidelines. Have this one like an individual site. The guidelines are there to actually help people and also help organisations and people with intellectual disabilities. And this is like an example of how to guide. As you can see here, you will find guidelines. And it also has like different menus here and different like types of meetings, as you can see, like training, focus groups, how to run a meeting, even online meetings or a conference like what we are currently here now.
So yeah, like Harry said, they're all kind of broken it down into checklists, how-to lists, which should be easy for organisations to follow and just check off as you're trying to do different bits of work. And then there's also useful resources that come from our members, or examples that come from our members, which kind of might be useful. The website is currently in English and Spanish, and we're working on an Arabic translation and a Portuguese translation at the moment, so those should be ready soon. So we've just got a short video to show you, which is of one of our self-advocate colleagues who, along with Harry, was a consultant for us as we were developing the guidelines. Her name is Dominique. She's from Argentina, and she, in this video, talks about when she was included in a job that, or wasn't included in a job that she had, sorry.
Yo estuve en un trabajo donde no me incluían en la reunión. Trabajaba como todo, pero cuando llegaba el momento de una reunión, todos mis compañeros iban y yo me quedaba afuera, no estaba limitada. También tuve muchas veces en la reunión donde hablé muy rápido y no me daba tiempo a pensar, así que nunca llegaba a dar mi opinión. Reuniones donde todos entienden y participan, pero yo no había podido ver materiales con tiempo y me perdía. Otra vez fui a una reunión, pero se había cancelado. Nadie me avisó, porque nadie pensó en mí. Eso no es inclusión. Eso es tener una persona con capacidad intelectual en una lista de empleados. Pero esta inclusión es mentira. Aunque realmente necesitamos trabajar, la verdad es que también queremos ser respetados. Como cualquier persona, las reuniones de proyectos de disposición internacional de un cine internacional se organizaban en Inglaterra, en inglés. Yo estaba conectada conmigo, con mi apoyo el intérprete al español fácil, y otros están en otra parte del mundo con sus apoyos. Así que sí podemos participar en las reuniones en serio. Así podemos participar en reuniones globales en distintos idiomas. Podemos participar en nuestro propio país.
Ja tähän väliin tulee...
I'm very sorry about the adverts.
Arvoisa
Lo más fácil es pensar que incluirnos en reuniones, como incluir a una persona que habla en nuestro idioma. ¿Por qué en las reuniones donde se hablan varios idiomas solo le dan tiempo a los traductores para traducir y nadie le parece que están perdiendo el tiempo? Y si va a haber información en otro idioma, que mande con anticipación. Lo mismo nos pasa a nosotros. Necesitamos tener con tiempo la agenda de materiales y en las reuniones tener tiempo para hablar. Y también es importante que lo que comparte la pantalla sea algo que están hablando. Porque si no, nos confundimos, como le puede pasar a cualquier persona. Yo agradezco la oportunidad de estar en este proyecto, escuchar, incluir y respetar. Con esta experiencia me empoderé y crecí. Y este año hasta tomé valor y reducí a mi trabajo. Fue una decisión difícil, pero tengo derecho a progresar como todo lo demás. Por eso es tan importante que las organizaciones que trabajan para personas con discapacidad intelectual empiecen a trabajar con personas con discapacidad. Tiene que ser la primera en incluir en todos los niveles. Nos empodera, nos ayuda a crecer como personas y como líderes. Los gobiernos también pueden y tienen que incluir. De este año yo represento a las personas con discapacidad intelectual en el Consejo Honorario de COPRIDIS, que es la Oficina de Discapacidad de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires. fuimos elegidos por otras organizaciones y es la primera vez que esta oficina comparte reuniones con personas con discapacidad intelectual en primera persona. Con el apoyo adecuado podemos participar de nuestro derecho a hacerlo. Siento mucho orgullo de ocupar ese espacio, porque las personas con discapacidad intelectual también podemos formarnos para ser líderes y participar en primera persona. Es bueno que nos incluya en serio desde el principio de los proyectos. A la larga es mejor para todos. El nombre de nuestro proyecto tiene las ideas más importantes: escuchar y respetar a las personas con discapacidad intelectual. Incluir significa nada de nosotros sin nosotros. La principal recomendación es creer en la inclusión. Una organización inclusiva cree en la inclusión, cree que las personas con discapacidad intelectual somos capaces y que también podemos ser líderes. Sabemos que la inclusión plena no va a ser un día para el otro. No es un camino fácil, no es un camino cómodo. El mejor ejemplo lo dan las organizaciones que no abandonan ese camino, porque siguen el verdadero camino humano. Un camino en el que estamos juntos. Un camino que no deje a nadie atrás. Muchas gracias.
That was a very brave video Domi has done to share her experience of why she was not included and why it was such a difficult decision for her to quit her job. For someone like Domi, it took courage when she was not included, and she's advocating for everyone else. So she's a self-advocate. She's advocating, especially being on Listen, Include, Respect, because she wants no one else to go through what she went through.
Thank you, Harry. That's a great summary. And yeah, Domi did quit her job, and then she went on to get another job, and now she works for an organisation in Argentina where she is a trainer on diversity and inclusion. And as you can tell, she's a great speaker and a very powerful trainer. So it all it went well for Domi. I think we're kind of coming towards our 30-minute deadline, but I just wanted to quickly kind of highlight some of the parts of the guidelines that might be interesting, and you might have some time to have a look at. So we've got guidelines around inclusive projects. So again, all of the guidelines really follow those principles and make sure that people with intellectual disabilities are included from the start. We've done a few different testing pieces of work around these projects, and we know that the reference group model, which is including a group of people with intellectual disabilities to really work with an organisation and plan the project from the start, is a great way of doing the work. Similarly, we've got a guide on inclusive boards and how to support people with intellectual disabilities to be on boards and to be part of decision making. I think a really key point around that is comes from one of our other self-advocate colleagues, Tia, who's sat on a lot of boards, and she really tries to make sure to emphasize that role modeling from the chair and from the other board members is really important, really crucial, and that really makes a big difference in making sure that people with intellectual disabilities are well included. We've got a section on inclusive employment, and Harry, I know that you have an example from a recent interview that you went to, which was good with NHS England. Do you want to explain quickly why it was so good?
Yeah, this was at NHS about a year and a half ago. So in January 2022, I was invited by our National Health Service for a network manager role in the intellectual disability and autism team. And they've made reasonable adjustments and made sure my interview was accessible. I think it was more to do with they specialise in learning disability and autism, and this is why and I've got lots of people with intellectual disabilities working in the NHS in this specific department. I think, and before the interview, they actually sent the questions to me in advance. So when I answered them, I'll be able to give an answer prepared in a more detailed way. And they've also wanted me to check an easy read guide just to see if it's accessible, but I don't know if it was a test or just to check it. But at the end of the day, it was all inclusive and all very accessible. And I think I gained a lot of experience from that. I think their NHS example will be good for the rest of the NHS to do the same, because I know they focus on reasonable accommodation in this specific department, but the rest of the NHS needs to do what they are doing. So that's why they made the reasonable adjustments, because they do it anyway, because they're working with people with intellectual disabilities and they've got people with intellectual disabilities working in their team. So this is why they did it, to make me feel quite good. But it'd be great to see other organisations trying to make these adjustments, because I've had other interviews and there was times that applications and interview questions were not accessible, especially when I had to take part in a test in less than 48 hours.
Thank you, Harry. And yeah, we have other kind of examples of what members have done around inclusive employment linked on the website. So then finally, we've got a section around good support and how we can make sure that support workers are really using a rights-based approach, as our colleague from the UN talked about earlier, and why that's so important. So we've got that linked in the guidelines as well. And finally, just before me and Harry finish, I just wanted to talk about our consultancy services. So we're just starting Listen, Include, Respect consultancy services with self-advocates from our network and Down Syndrome International's network. We've done a few different pieces of work with different international organisations, and we have a large group of self-advocates who are ready to give their advice and support to organisations. And we're also working with many of our members who do similar types of work. So, for example, providing services around Easy Read or services around inclusive employment. So, yeah, this is our email addresses, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry and Ailis. I've prepared some comments, and I hope that in my head they connect to what you were presenting and to the guidelines. But I hope other people in this room can find the connection as well. So I'm not sure, but let's try. Firstly, I had a look at the guidelines yesterday, and it is really impressive work that you have done. The whole process, how many people, how many organizations from so many countries involved, that is just something that is kind of like it feels that there's a good base for your work there. And I also love the guidelines. They were really easy to move there in the guide in the system. They were kind of guiding you too. So when you started from somewhere, it was suggesting you other places to go, which you might not maybe expect. For example, employment. It wasn't something that I was kind of right away expecting there. So it was really good, and I really love the way that it was how to, rather than some obscure sort of abstract commitments and values. Of course, there's the value base there where you started from, but these are like really practical ways of how to make participation inclusive, and also the examples that were there: consent form, accessible agenda, and so on. I think those can be used in so many spaces and places. really, I already found it useful for my work, and I hope that everyone here in the audience goes and has a look and finds things that they weren't looking for. Let's put it that way. So, and then to my other comments. So, I have been doing lately, past couple of years, I've been doing research, well, actually 5 years, research on democracy and critical democracy studies, and especially doing research on how young people can participate in Finnish society. And my focus has been on marginalized groups. So this is where my comments come from. So I actually see that many of these in the guidelines, many of the practices can also be useful when we try to think about our societies and where and how citizens should be participating, and how these forums where we are participating, for whom they are meant and who can actually realistically take part. One of the things, the thing that I started to think when I was clicking through the guidelines is the tokenism. That is something that I meet in my research a lot. How people are kind of, how different kinds of institutions are inviting citizens to take part, but actually they are just sort of like taking part in the surface and not actually having influence on what is going on. So there's some things that I was kind of, because there is this idea that in the guidelines that as well as giving useful advice, there's also the idea that people should have possibility to, for example, to have the inclusive project where it's not just including people in some point of the project, but whole process. And this is something that comes up in the democracy research with children and young people. So the question of who sets the agenda. So in order for participation to be meaningful, it is the topics where people take part, they need to have some sort of relevance to the people who take part. And this way it is important to think like what is the mechanism, for example, in organization, but also for example, in a municipality or council, where citizens or service users can actually do initiatives. So initiate some topics into discussion or into development projects of kind of what we need to change. And there's like, in the democracy research, there's proof that when you have these sort of other ways of, so people can do these initiatives, it actually changes the structure of who participates. So we are not getting only those who are kind of like conceived as the most active citizens, but for example, in Finland, we have this citizens initiative system. And this is very popular with all kinds of citizens who many of them usually they're not activated by voting or something. But then there's this sort of specific thing that they feel that is really important for them. For example, in Finland, we had this sort of equal marriage law that came into force because of the citizens' initiatives. This was sort of, there was lots of pressure, there was campaigning and everything. And in this whole process, there was that kind of movement that we don't usually see in elections. Some people get really excited about elections, but many don't. So it's kind of, it's a new way of, and it changes our mindset of, hey, who should be participating? Who are active? Of course, people aren't active and participating if it's not interesting. So I think thinking about that of course it's important to include people at some point of a decision-making process, but also we need to be sort of like have the bar quite high and think that we have to have these systems where people can actually sort of initiate these new questions and projects and so on. I'm currently also involved in a study where we are doing research for the advisory board for the rights of persons with disabilities in Finland, VANE. And we are asking how rights are put in practice in lives of disabled people. And in that survey, we were asking people how do the respondents think that participation of disabled people is realized right now in Finland. And the open questions, there were this sort of call for different kinds of forums and routes for citizens to take part, not just sort of like disability councils in municipalities or so we need to, because that there was this call for that not or disability organizations being included in policy making, but actually that there's these more direct routes and more sort of like easy to take part routes for all kinds of people to take part in politics, which is kind of, and it brings out that there's more of these active people there than we actually think. They just haven't found the right way to sort of like take part. At the same time, I think the guidelines are something that what we bump into in research is that we have, for example, youth councils in different kinds of each municipality in Finland needs to have a youth council, but the representation of disabled young people is very low there. So guidelines would be one way of making sure that we just move these barriers that we might not even understand that there are in, for example, youth councils. And then one thing that really also was highlighted in this study, in the answers that we got from disabled people in Finland, was the criticism of this kind of pseudo participation, or pseudo sort of that it looks like that people are taking that people are included, but it is actually not happening. In Finnish we say näennäisosallistuminen, lovely word. And it was repeated in many of the and one of the questions was that people are invited to take part too late in the process. That when basically decisions have already been made when, for example, the municipality's disability council is sort of consulted on the process. And I think probably in organizations we can see this, like you're almost ready to sort of like hammer it down that, okay, yeah, well, we finalized the process, and then somebody says, should we ask our service user, and then you're put together this sort of like focus group or something, and then basically everything has been decided already. And there was lots of criticism in our study about this. So I think we cannot, and often we think that tokenism is to do with sort of not taking people in and not really hearing their voice, but it's just as frustrating and tokenistic if that decision, that participation doesn't have any impact on the decisions that are made. And this actually brings me to my last comment, which is impact. So in the guidelines, there's a section about feedback, and I think this is super important. People need to see what has happened with their, like after their participation, how this has affected the decision-making process. And otherwise it is again tokenistic. And it's also in the democracy research, it's a super big discussion on how we can keep people interested and get people to participate. And it's also challenging because participation has become a fashion. So there's this, in the research we talk about participatory turn. So every single organization, institution in the society need to take sort of like ask people to participate, and at the same time they don't some of them don't really know what they actually do with the knowledge that they gain from that. And that way the actual invitation of taking part can actually it can be harmful if you invite people to take part and it doesn't have any effect. So we must always sort of think that the participation needs to have an effect and we need to make it visible. Otherwise, why would we actually participate? Well, who would it be silly as that to take part and be active if it doesn't have any effect? And in democracy research, we're talking about trust and motivation. And I think also in this context, we should keep these two in mind. There needs to be trust in the respect and also in listening and including people. And that way people will keep motivated. That's my comments. But it was really, I had a nice day yesterday, so it was really nice to have a look at those guidelines. And yeah, I'm a bit tired with big fancy values and punchlines, and that was really practical. So thank you, and thanks for your presentation. Should we open the floor or for comments and questions? And yeah, sure. You start from.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm a bit disappointed that this session is taking in place of workshop. I wish it was in an opening session, because everybody wants to transform in a human rights-based way. I hear that a lot, but the question is how? And you give the answer. This is how. So to bring this to as many constituents and stakeholders as possible, that's key. I really hope that this will be disseminated widely among everyone. So thank you for your excellent work. The self-advocate and the case of hard discrimination is absolutely worrying. These cases must be taken seriously. It is a hardcore discrimination against a person with disability. That is something that should never be taken lightly. And thank you for bringing that example to our attention. I want to ask one question. Office of the High Commissioner, we take the consultation with persons with disabilities and their representative organizations very seriously. But we need to increase our effort on consulting variety of organizations and also different constituencies within those organizations. Youth with intellectual disabilities, women and girls, children. Please advise us and guide us. How can we improve in that regard? And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you found them useful, and we've been really appreciative of different UN agencies using the guidelines and promoting the guidelines. So thank you very much. So the question, Harry, it's around how to make sure that lots of different kinds of and different groups of people with intellectual disabilities are involved in consultations and are being contacted by organizations like the UN. Do you have any advice?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry, I'm used to taking microphones off other people. I keep forgetting I had one on me. Yeah, I think what is so important is if you're going to contact someone from the UN, I think
so it's about the UN making sure that they're talking to people with intellectual disability or people with disabilities, but from lots of different kinds of groups. So like young people, women.
Yeah. What is very important is I would like to do some work with the UN at some point in my life, because I know I've done lots of work over the years relating to the UN, but I want to do lots of work working with the UN in the near future. I think what needs to be done is they need to be going out, looking at all the different groups in other countries and contacting them, and maybe speaking to like people with disabilities, including those with intellectual disabilities, about is their rights respected, if their rights are being denied. They should do like a research The UN CRPD, the United Nations on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, is there as a treaty since 2006. I think what's important is to keep people's rights being respected. It's important that the UN does an investigation on like a research program maybe, and get people with intellectual disabilities or people with disabilities views, because countries might sign up to this treaty, but they don't always respect the rights. Why not them do a research? This just came out of the blue in my head because I kind of like thinking of the word research quite a lot. Maybe the UN's got something special there.
That's a good idea, Harry, and I'm sure there's different groups within the UN who are kind of doing those things. But I think also you touched upon like really talking to people in different places, and I know that can be hard when there's lots of levels and lots of, you know, talking to people on a local level can be difficult, and you have to go through organisations of people with disability at an international level, at a regional level, at a local level. So the recommendations would really be making sure there's enough time, and I know that can be difficult, and that was one of the big barriers that we heard about, was that there's often consultations are rushed. There next week, the information isn't in an accessible format, and it's not shared in a way that's easily gets to people. It's not always in the languages that people speak. It's not always sent in the way that people would find out about, like, you know, it's on websites. The UN website is quite difficult to navigate. So I suppose within the guidelines, that kind of, those are sort of some of the more practical things that we recommend, like, you know, time, accessible communications, and really working with self-advocates to give advice around those processes. So I think what you said, Harry, about really talking to people with intellectual disabilities is really important. And thank you.
If I can add, in Finland we had this, I think 2020, it was a Minister of Justice was releasing this report where the idea was to look at how the whole kind of how these sort of different institutions and forums where children and young people can voice their needs and views, how they work in Finland, and how they are working in relation to the UN Convention on Rights of Children. And the title of the report was "Listened to but not heard." And the idea was that there were like two groups that were focused on. One was children and young people who were placed outside of their family homes for different kinds of reasons. And the other one was disabled children and young people. And they couldn't reach disabled children and young people. And this is something that we also need, these sort of structures. For example, within disability organizations, we need these sort of groups of young people, and we bump into this all the time when we're doing research on disabled young people, and because we need to reach them from somewhere, and if time is an issue, then you're going to sort of like fail basically in this. So I think we need to have these structures, and we need to also understand these sort of like that these, for example, disability organizations, that there are children's rights that they need to follow, and this sort of requires something from them, and there should be structures within the organizations where we can actually hear children and young people, and not only their parents. So I think that's one key.
I think just as an example of how, so the Centre of Inclusive Policy is working with one of the UN agencies on a piece of work around children and young people at the moment. And we work with them to so we brought together a group of self-advocates who gave recommendations around how to run inclusive focus groups, how to create an inclusive survey, which they followed, and they were able to get much more participation from people with young people with intellectual disabilities. So we were very proud that worked, because they had included people with intellectual disabilities at the start of the process in their planning.
Other comments, questions? I'll bring the mic over.
I could run too, if you want me to. But I think that one of the things that aren't touched upon is that a whole lot of times it's political structures, companies, organizations, reaching out to people with intellectual disability to ask them what they think about what we think about. And I do think that more organizations need to instead go to people with intellectual disabilities and ask them, what do you want us to do? What do you want to improve? You know, so it's a question of where the initiative is. And I think that we are training ourselves to use people with intellectual disability as some sort of a feedback position, right? And that's good, of course. But sometimes also maybe a feedback position that works as an alibi. So I think that we would need also to make the shift from reacting to things to actually be in power of what should be done.
Thank you. Really important comment. I could continue that. One of the things that I've been bumping into research is the kind of narrowness of what we think of disability issues or youth issues or children's issues. So this kind of leads to organizations or institutions involving this group of people in some topics, but not in others. And it creates really sort of like weird situations. For example, that young people have been having this like massive climate movement for past 5-6 years. I think we all know it. And at the same time, we still find policy reports that don't discuss children and young people at all. So and we can see that their representation isn't taken seriously in these policy processes. So there's this sort of like a mismatch. How do you say it in English? So these two things don't meet each other because we kind of there's this powerful people thinking that some issues belong to young people and touch young people and others don't. More comments, questions?
I also wanted to ask if anyone had any like good examples that they wanted to share from their organizations of including people with intellectual disabilities or
There's one there.
Thank you. I would not say, I'm Lieve de Kempeneer, Director of FUBI, an organization in Brussels supporting adults with disabilities. I would not say that we are the best in this field, but of course in our strategic plan that started 3 years ago and will end next year, we made this together with clients. So I think that was already fundamental. We also had a project on how you include, how do you do co-production with clients, and it was called Enable, and we learned a lot there from what you have now in Listen, Include, Respect. So these tools that we can use. We have clients in our, how do you say that in English? I can't find a word really. It's an organization that, it's not an organization, it's a meeting in our organization that where clients and families are to make together with us the managing of the organization. It's not the board, it's called user participation. It's a name like that. So this is the tools that we have, but for instance, we don't have anybody in our board. This is something that we could improve. We also have a meeting that we use as where our end clients and staff people, support workers all together, and they are used as a kind of advice group for us. If we have a problem or we think we should make a solution, that we can go to that group, call them together, and they can give advice. So this is some ways that we are using it. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for this topic, and I appreciate that. My name is Greg Wellams, and I'm from the States, and we've had the privilege, and I'm going to put a plug in for Inclusion International, because we've been working with them for the last year on how do we incorporate these guidelines and how do we transform our organization to be more inclusive and develop and use these guidelines to literally create social innovation from the ground up level. The interesting thing for me is these guidelines are the excitement that it has generated in support professionals and the support roles, because they're very excited to move from a caregiver and mentality into working with, into transforming the service models to be more inclusive. And it's been from a leadership level, it's also very exciting to see this interaction that's occurring as we engage in steps to become more inclusive in everything that we do. So elements of this are starting to transform our what it means to provide education and learning, what it means to provide materials and policies and practices and everything that we do as we reach out to get guidance from people with lived experiences. So it's for us, and we're a large organization, it's going to take time, but it's because this is a ground up initiative, and it can't be a top down kind of process. It really has to be iterative and growing and from peers and from colleagues that help generate that excitement and generate some momentum to help transform an organization.
Thank you for sharing that experience. I just realized that I've been a very bad moderator, and we've eaten up 5 minutes of our lunch break. So I want to thank Harry and Ailis for a very, very interesting presentation and for introducing the guidelines to us. We all need to use them. And I want to also thank you, audience, and let's keep the discussion flowing during lunch. Thank you.